Good day. My name is Natasha Nelson, and I will be covering my report on verbal communication. Okay, now then, what forms of communication are available for information exchange? You can use both verbal and nonverbal communication to exchange information. However, as Adrian Perez said from our reading, you can't necessarily express your feelings and your thoughts. They may be there, but you can't get them out. And you really can't get new thoughts in with nonverbal communication. Therefore, verbal communication is the best form of communication for relationships because it helps us to express thoughts, feelings, needs, relationship connotation, and observations. Now then, what is verbal communication and what is its functions? Verbal communication is a language that is both written and spoken, and that there's a defined written and spoken rules for that, okay? So it could carry symbols, which letters, different things like that, or it could just simply carry actual symbols. But as long as those are agreed upon and governed by rules, then that's verbal communication. Now, what are some of the functions of verbal communication? It helps us to define reality. With words, with symbols, you have the ability to express past tense, future tense, whether you need something right now in the present tense. You have the ability to carry out and make someone understand what your reality is and what you need now, in the future, and in the past. Okay? And that can very much help with expressing your thoughts and your observations. Okay? It also helps us to organize complex ideas and experiences, and helps us to use emotion. So your thoughts, your feelings, and your needs, those are definitely are complex ideas that won't necessarily be expressed by hand signals or smiles. Those are things that can be only expressed necessarily by words. Because once you get into complexities, you're looking at, as opposed to just, I need to eat, you're looking at the ideas of why I need to eat. Am I hungry? What are your feelings, your complex ideas and feelings and needs? How can those be expressed more effectively? And that's definitely through verbal communication. It helps us to think. So once you get into the complexities of the mind and into the complexities of emotions, you have more to think about. There's not just a simple subject matter. There's not just a simple action that needs to be thought about. There's the why and the consequences of those actions, emotions, and ideas. And so that's how verbal communication helps us to think. And the last function is it helps us to shape our attitude about each other and the world. So verbal communication, with verbal communication, you have very different languages. And all of these different languages all throughout our world have different rules that govern them. So if you have one language that has different rules, they may have a different attitude about the world. Maybe their language is only built in formalities and in a central and loving approach to the world. Whereas another language may not have formal language. It may just be all very simple and informal and talking one-on-one. Those can help you shape how the world works. If your language doesn't have a future tense, and that is agreed upon language in your community, you may not think about the future as another language in another country may have. Okay? And that can help with your observations. It also helps with your relationship connotation. If you're not thinking about relationships and how they're going to work in the future, then you may not speak upon those. You may not exchange that information. Okay? Now, verbal communication is rule governed. Okay? So you have to have certain rules that govern that language. And what are those different rules? What are the characteristics of those rules? Well, a verbal communication, or a verbal language must have propositionality. And that basically means that a language must have propositions that can be proven false or proven that they're correct. Okay, so you must have something that you can state, and it must be able to be proven right or wrong. Okay, these verbal languages must also have discreteness. Okay, that means that they have to have a discrete, understood, agreed upon meaning. Okay, displacement. That means that a language can refer to things removed in time and space. Once again, we're going back to having an idea of different time periods, of different space periods, and then also with emotions. Okay. So you can sometimes necessarily your emotions aren't necessarily in a time and a space. Some people can feel depressed and still be happy at that moment, but they still have an overcoming sense of anxiety and depression, and that's something that has to do with displacement. And then last is structure. All languages have to adhere to some sort of grammatical rule. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to have the same grammatical rules. However, they have to have an agreed upon grammatical rule within their language. And if you have that, then you can fully express what you need to express and everyone understands what you're talking about because you have that agreed upon rule and everyone understands it. However, now, what distinguishes verbal from non-verbal communication? Well, you have to know the difference between formal versus informal. Whereas formal is written speech, such as notes, letters, emails. Sometimes you could also have informal speech, which is you and someone else speaking one-on-one. As we know, nonverbal communication does not have this. Written pieces are verbal communication. They have words that adhere to rules. You cannot have that in nonverbal communication. And speech is actually the words coming out of your mouth. And once again, that's not in nonverbal either. The second thing that distinguishes verbal from nonverbal communication is synchronous versus asynchronous. Okay? Synchronous means taking place in real time. Okay? Asynchronous is not immediately and may occur over long periods of time. And as we talked about before, with nonverbal communication, you don't necessarily get a time period. There is no hand signals or things that can express time and place. And so you don't know, all information is usually synchronous with verbal communication. However, with nonverbal communication. However, with verbal communication, you have differentiations of those two. Then you have recorded versus non-recorded. That's another distinguishing factor between verbal and nonverbal communication. When you record something, it recorded. You can save it. It has necessarily no timestamp. Certain things like our voicemails, our emails. These, voicemail, voice emails, because I do those. These are things that we understand that we can get back to. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to do an immediate response. We may be able to even think of our response, whereas unrecorded is immediate speech. It's someone talking to you immediately. And then there is privacy. With verbal communication, you have to know the difference of your audience. You have to know if you're just speaking to someone one-on-one and if that needs to be let out. Whereas opposed to we have these new things in social media where that privacy is very much being tested, because what information do you want to have out and to how many people? And that is something that distinguishes between verbal and non-verbal communication, because in non-verbal communication, it is just to that one person, and it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to worry about a privacy issue. Now, in conclusion, now that you understand verbal communication and how it's the best form of communication for expressing thoughts, feelings, need, relationship connotation, and observation in any relationship, how will you use it? In my mind, as long as the recipient agrees on its rules and knows the language, you can effectively communicate, and therefore it is the best form of communication. Thank you once again for listening to me, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful day.